Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's dig in, huh?
Yeah, so if we're live, hello, welcome everybody to the live show. We have a very lively panel here today, as you can tell. We're all very excited about the supply chain, but mostly important, we're excited to be here with you today at the Seed Node Conference. So I have some really great panelists with me today, and I love that our intro was human-centric and real and authentic because absolutely.
Yeah. Let's dig in, huh?
Yeah, so if we're live, hello, welcome everybody to the live show. We have a very lively panel here today, as you can tell. We're all very excited about the supply chain, but mostly important, we're excited to be here with you today at the Seed Node Conference. So I have some really great panelists with me today, and I love that our intro was human-centric and real and authentic because today in the supply chain, it's very easy to get caught up in the processes. It's very easy to get caught up in the technology, and it's super easy to get caught up in the woe is me and the victim mindset. But what we always have to remember is when we get back to the fundamentals and we remember that it is people who are driving the supply chain, and it is our goal as an industry to enable people to do the best job they can, the easiest they can, so that they can meet their goals at the end of the day, so that they can get back with their families and they can also enjoy those nice products and goods that supply chains work so hard to get to each and every one of us. So with that said, welcome to today's panel where we're going to be talking about the role of supply chain resilience and talking about how supply chain companies can start rethinking how they've orchestrated their networks and how they've put together processes, how they've aligned people and the technology they're using to move things forward and overcome some of these massive disruptions that we're seeing in the marketplace today. So just to give a quick intro of myself, my name is Adam Robinson. I'm the CEO and founder of a supply chain digital marketing agency, the Robinson Agency. And like a lot of people, I think, including the panelists here today, and maybe you who is listening today in the audience, I got a little taste of the supply chain about 10 years ago when I got a role as a head of marketing for a third-party logistics service provider here in the USA. And once you get a taste of that supply chain, you absolutely become addicted to it because you understand how important it is to our daily lives. It's more than just a business function, that it's actually a lifestyle and a life function. And in fact, one of my panelists, Mr. Brian, he has started a worldwide federation, and he constantly tweets about, how our lives are supply chains, that the way we're going to fix the biggest problems in the world, such as, reducing carbon emissions and creating better human lives and making all of us happy, it actually starts with the supply chain. So when we talk about the supply chain, it's really critical that we bring the best and brightest minds to you so that we can get some consideration. So today I have joining me three amazing folks that we're going to talk about our discussion. And I'm going to have them introduce themselves and have a little bit of their background told to you so you can kind of understand where they're coming from. So I'll kick it off with Sophia, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe your background.
Absolutely. Thank you, Adam. And thank you, everyone, for having the opportunity to have me here today. Where I come from, it's basically a mix of industry and consulting as such in different roles, growing up from the grassroots of supply chain, from administrative roles to leadership roles. So I covered basically everything that you can dream of in supply chain in real life, and guess that's where I thought that after learning around 19 odd years in different roles and from different perspectives, I wanted to not just hand over, but share what I know in a small company as such, and started my own company last year at the start of the pandemic. So talk about disruption and how we manage that. Yeah, basically just wanted to make sure that I'm not locked into one company, but I can really share what I know and what I came across during these 20 odd years with the different situations, and let others also still teach me a lot of other stuff. So I would say it's never just a one-sided story, but really to make more value of what I know of supply chains and value chains and sustainability. And as we talk about, disruptions and such, I worked a lot with supply chain digitalization and how this can help. So what are those critical enablers that we will discuss later on. that can also help, shed more light on whether we are sustainable or not, and how long we can manage what we have. So yeah, that's where I am at the moment, in a small company run by myself, and hopefully many more years to come to engage with a lot of nice companies who want to take the right steps to develop right and sustainable supply chains across the globe.
Absolutely. Well, fantastic. And as a great segue into our next guest, Mr. Brian, Mark Andreessen once said that software is going to eat the world, but I would argue that maybe supply chain software will eat the world. And you said something else that I think is pretty well said in the history of Silicon Valley and the venture capital world, is that information wants to be free. Well, supply chain information wants to be free. So with that said, Brian, if you can give the folks a little bit about your background and introduction into what you've been up to for the last few years.
So I'm completely self-taught in terms of what I think I know about supply chains. And starting, let's say most recently, let's call it 2015, 2016, I got into studying logistics because I was looking at a logistics technology startup. And the more I learned, the more I realized just how big and important supply chains are. I think I always knew it in the back of my mind, but then that work really drove it home for me. And so in 2017, my co-founder Lisa and I decided to start the New York Supply Chain Meetup. And originally the plan was just to build a community in New York for people who are constantly thinking about supply chain and innovation and technology. That effort eventually led to people asking us if we could work with them to create similar communities in other places. So then we started building what we call the Worldwide Supply Chain Federation. And that's the idea, is to create a network of grassroots-driven supply chain meetups. Simultaneously, we're building a brand new venture fund, Refashioned Ventures, where raising our first vehicle, which is a rolling fund on AngelList, hoping to do our first close in July. And the thesis there is that if you start, 2015, 2016, 2018, or even in 2020, and you think about the biggest problems the world has to solve, fundamentally, they all boil down to supply chain problems. And usually when I say that, someone will gleefully challenge me, because they'll be like, well, what about climate change? Isn't climate change bigger than supply chains? And that's an interesting question. Yes, climate change is the biggest challenge that humanity has to grapple with. But everything that human beings do, everything in the world, is built on supply chains. Even if you think about nature, nature has its own supply chains, right? We call them cycles. But man-made supply chains are harming the environment. So if we're going to tackle climate change, my argument is that we're going to have to take a long and hard look at man-made supply chains and deal with them. And so that's the investment thesis for the venture fund. And for the community, we were after thinking about this for an excruciatingly long time, I reached a conclusion which we summarize in our mantra. The future was built on supply. I should remember this off the top of my head, but I'm not good at memorizing things. The past ran on supply chains. The present runs on supply chains. The future will run on supply chains. The world is a supply chain, and so the world is a supply chain is the tagline that you were talking about. Adam.
Absolutely. And I think even my day job, it's marketing, but it's also a supply chain. And that's what I tell a lot of people. Yeah. I'm sourcing material to produce, to distribute, and get in front of the intended target audience and reduce as much waste and inefficiency in that process as I can, so I can scale and be more efficient. And I think, Justin, you kind of round us out here as the esteemed, well-dressed one without a t-shirt, the only panelist today. So we appreciate you bringing up our professionalism, with your dress. So, that internal note we gave the group beforehand, Justin pulled through. So thanks, we appreciate that. But with that said, if you can give the audience a little bit about your background and what you're up to these days.
Yeah, so thanks everyone. My name is Justin Golston. I'm a professor of project and supply chain management at Penn State University. And I always say that, my research is, although, I teach supply chain, my research is all about blending supply chain with emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and blockchain with sustainability, because that's what I'm all about. I work with a number of organizations. If they're not about sustainability, if they're not about diversity and inclusion, I'm not working with them. That's my rule, right? Now, I'm a little bit different than Brian in that I was trained in supply chain management, and given that I have experience with supply chain management, I have the practical application of supply chain management. I'm now disrupting supply chain education, right? So I want to make supply chain education more practice based, and we're actually working on a project now called SydTech, SYDTEK. You can see, go to the website sydtek.ai, where we're reinventing higher education the Web3 way. And with these emerging technologies, a lot of these organizations are using blockchain. They're using artificial intelligence for profitability, right? We're trying to democratize AI. We're trying to democratize blockchain to bring students from computer science, business, law, ecology, sustainability together to collaborate, to create solutions to put on a blockchain so that everyone benefits, right? The organizations can use these solutions, but the real creators, just like NFTs, you create blockchain solutions for supply chain. You're the creator. Every time that particular solution gets executed, you get rewarded for it in perpetuity, forever. That's the way business should be, right? Yeah. So that's the project we're working on now. And like I said, we're trying to integrate blockchain with AI to create positive social change and create this sharing economy that I talked about, years ago when everybody thought I was nuts when I was talking about blockchain. Now look at it.
Well, I hope you continue to stay nuts, because it's those big ideas that move us forward, and I think what you really hit on there, Justin, and I'll start with you as we go into our discussion portion of this panel, is this sense of pragmatism and application, right? You talked about democratizing access to the tools and technology that are really powering a lot of enterprises' efforts in making the supply chain profitable and making their companies profitable, or being used in maybe other sectors of companies, such as the financial sector, but maybe aren't being as well applied with their cohorts in other departments. And so, let's talk about the sense of education a little bit, right? Because I'm a marketer. Brian gets into the sense of this a little bit, Sophia, in your discussions, where we kind of latch on to some of these movements, some of these buzzwords, and 5-6 years ago, it was things like blockchain. But we didn't really understand how that then boiled down into the pragmatic application in the day-to-day job. And so I want to talk about resilience a little bit in that sense, right? COVID hit, and us consultants and marketers and smart folks said, y'all need to be resilient. Your supply chains need to be able to handle this disruption. But when a supply chain manager steps up to the plate and they say, okay, cool, I hear you, publication, I hear you, Journal of Commerce, I hear you, Lodestar, I hear you out there, but I'm really concerned about my day-to-day. How does the practical supply chain day-to-day director start thinking about resiliency? What does that mean to them?
You need to get back to basics. You need to get away from these buzzwords. I think one of my close peers that I work with, he calls it C-suite buzzword bingo. I was at a conference with him, and whenever he said that, I said, I have to connect with this guy, because he hit the nail on the head with that one. And you need to get back to basics in that you need to collaborate, you need to communicate both internally and externally. That's how you become resilient. Not all this crazy stuff and all these long journal articles. No, pick up the doggone phone, get on Zoom, and collaborate with your peers around with your employees around the world, and collaborate with your business partners around the world. That's how you become.
So you're talking about
you can
speaking up for your needs with your fellow, your fellow relationship holders around the supply chain and your stakeholders, right? Because I think, a lot of us, especially a guy in marketing or someone in sales, I say, you need to buy this technology. That's what's going to make you resilient. That's what's going to help you collaborate. But are you saying even, boil it back down to simple things? Maybe you're consulting people, Sophia. Let's get your perspective on this. So you have somebody in front of you and they say, look, Sophia, technology, cool. I'm having trouble just communicating in general. How do you start building that goodwill of collaboration? How do you tell your larger organization, I need your help, and do what Justin says and pick up that phone? What's next after you pick up the phone? How do you get them engaged?
Well, it's very simple for me as well. As Justin said, get back to basics. It's basically starting with realizing that, first of all, I'm not alone. I'm not in a silo. And it's not just about picking up the phone, but literally starting to adopt, a mindset where I'm willing to take a look at things from the perspective of my fellow coworkers and peers along the whole value chain, right? So that's where the transformation from a mindset perspective starts. If I'm willing to take a look at the whole issue, whatever I'm facing from the point of my CFO or just a finance manager, or even from an accountant's perspective, whom I'm collaborating with on a daily basis, or should collaborate, let's put it this way, then that person is more approachable immediately, right? Because I'm able to take their point of view and solve the issue for a mutual beneficial outcome, right? So it's not just me and my problem at that point, but everybody else's problem, right? So that's when, the discussion starts shifting from I need to solve this problem to we need to solve this problem together. And that's when we arrive to a discussion that yields the right result, right? When we see and take a look at everything from all of the perspectives, and they are all valid perspectives from a business point of view, but we need to reach that symbiosis that is missing, and we need to break down those silos and reach that symbiosis, at least on the mindset level, and that's when we can tackle the rest, right? And that's where the enablers come in later, but I'm not advising anyone to take a look at the technology first. I can only get back to what Justin said again. It's just start really from the basics again. It's really as simple and as complicated as it sounds. Yeah, and many people cannot make that step. Really, we got to a point where I see, even middle management or even lower layers in the organization, they know full well how they should collaborate. And somehow from a mental perspective, they just cannot make that step. And that's when it can happen that I actually advise them to go somewhere else. Don't take a supply chain advice, but start thinking about who you are as a person, as a professional, where your values lie, and etc. So it's a very different kind of support that they need at that point. And then if they are able to make that step, then we can get back to the supply chain discussion.
Well, Brian, that seems to be a lot about psychology and leading teams towards a shared goal, right? Justin's got Jackie Robinson in the background there, who transformed the mindset in America of Major League Baseball. But underneath him, was a crazy amount of work from the Negro Leagues in order to get to that point, right, of transformation. Okay, so we get to that point, that reckoning, and maybe for some it was the massive disruption brought by the pandemic, or maybe it was already underlying issues that the pandemic just simply highlighted, and it sort of forced them to get going and start building towards collaboration. But you talk to so many people, Brian, around the space. What is the next step? What separates those who collaborate, change mindset, and then are now ready to execute? How are those who transform their supply chain thinking about executing next once they've gotten that collaboration buy-in from the company? How do they align that and make it happen?
So it sounds to me like once you're in the mindset where collaboration both internally and externally is what you want to do, then the next question is, how do you arm the people in your organization? And let's make it more specific. Internally, your operations organization; externally, your supply chain organization. How do you arm them with the tools that they need to succeed, right? And technology is really just a set of tools that empower the people trying to accomplish a goal to accomplish that goal. And that's where I think the technology and the startups and the AI and the blockchain and the C-suite buzzword bingo that that Justin referred to, that's where that comes in. But the problem with the buzzword bingo, as much as we laugh about it, is that it can cloud what each company really needs to get done, right? So the one thing I think we will agree about supply chains and operations is that each company does things differently, right? You can't make the claim that just because two companies are in the same industry that that the way they run operations and the way they manage their supply chain is the same. And so instead of talking about, you know, machine learning or blockchain or AI or whatever the phrase of the day is, I prefer to talk about the specific problem that someone is trying to solve, right? Specifically within my company, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? And if we can define that problem in quote unquote excruciating detail, then we can go out and find the solution that actually solves that problem, as opposed to, let's say, deciding you're going to do some, I don't know, neural network thing in your supply chain and then discovering after 2 or 3 years that that was not the approach that you should have pursued in the first place.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a paper cut, thinking that it's a wound from an axe. You haven't really evaluated what's going on here. And Brian, are you saying I can't just, you know, want to do 25,000 steps a day and it just happens? You mean I got to put in the work, right?
You have to put in the work.
And the reason I'm giving him a hard time is because he'll post screenshots of his 27,000 steps to make me feel bad.
But this is what
I'm a super hater on that one. I'm super hater when he's doing that.
This is what people don't realize. And it took even my wife a while to come to this realization. I don't just roll out of bed and go out and do 25,000 steps. Actually, one time I did. But I generally do not just roll out of bed and go and run a half marathon. Typically, what I'll do is first I'll walk for 5 minutes. And someone will laugh at me. Oh my God, you just walked for 5 minutes. How stupid. That's okay. Then I'll do 15 minutes. Then I'll do 3 miles. And then I'll do 5 miles. And one day I'll be like, okay, I think I'm ready for a long walk. And then I'll do the 20. But people don't see all the baby steps I took before.
Exactly. You know, and I think, you know, that's really such a good metaphor for the supply chain. It's really just the sum of the total parts that get you to the end goal. You know, Justin, you talked about democratizing technology, right? And I think what's great about the step thing is it brings you visibility into how many steps you did, you know, what's your oxygen level. And that's what technology can do. It's a great monitor of real world activity where you can take action to make a change. And it's without that visibility into process. And technology is doing this really well, particularly things like blockchain, because of the way it has immutable record keeping where somebody can't just come in and change it. So you have a version of the truth. But when you have that visibility technology, you know, beyond getting buy-in on the front end, let's say we're now saying, okay, we've got everybody involved and we're more collaborative. We're improving some of our processes. We're using analytics to see where we need to focus. How do you keep people interested past the great toilet paper shortage or once the pandemic's over? Because I fear that without this public, you know, image that's happening today in the supply chain, unless we keep getting ships stuck, I worry it goes back to the, you know, back office function and not a strategic core competitive nature. So how do you continue to get companies to put more focus on this continually? What are the benefits once you have supply chain resiliency in place that make you want to keep supply chain resiliency in place?
It goes back to what you just said. You have to keep that kind of on the front end. You have to keep it in the minds of the consumers, in the minds of the employees within the organization. I think that because supply chain is directly tied with, I'm about to say a buzzword bingo word, directly tied with sustainability, you can blend supply chain with these sustainability practices that all these organizations are talking about, right? I think that supply chain is at the heart of sustainability. So you have a lot of opportunity to continue to promote, this supply chain practice. Now, I'm one to say when people aren't talking about supply chain, we're doing our job.
Yes.
Right. We're doing our job.
Good point. Very good point.
So that's one thing to think about, but also, like I said, you can kind of tie the supply chain practice with the whole sustainability buzzword we're talking about right now.
Well, that's interesting. And Sophia, you in having conversations with supply chain leaders, you probably are a great coach to continue to make them a champion, right? To continue to demand more attention in the C-suite. And increasingly these leaders in the supply chain are becoming CEOs. And I think one of the best cases of this is Apple, right? You look at Tim Cook. And another good case was Boeing, but then he became, I think, he became a cabinet member, but he became the CEO as well. And he came from the supply chain. And I think because they have such good exposure, either on accident or by force, to every department within the organization. And so if we look at Tim Cook, right, the poor guy had to fulfill the promises of Steve Jobs. Like, I would not want that job. So no wonder he's the CEO now. But secondly, if you look at the profits and the revenue gained under Tim Cook in the last 10 years, Steve Jobs would say, man, maybe I should have made him CEO a long time ago. And I think it's because he commands the importance of quality and fulfilling a brand promise. And so how do supply chain leaders who are trying to get more attention with their C-suite, how do they, talk to the C-suite and show the business case and the value of what they can do for an organization? Is it analytics? Is it mindset? Is it something else? How do you consult your clients?
It's a really good question. And the only thing I ever really said and stressed for everyone is to be sure that you are not just an engineer or not just, a scientist. Because if you look back at supply chains 20, 30 years ago, many of the, I wouldn't call it C-level, but the higher level leadership in supply chain was majorly made up by engineers or scientists, right? Especially in some of the industries. And there, many people had to learn to speak the language of the business, right? They didn't have that skill. And for quite a long time, whether we like to admit it or not, in supply chain, many people were just unable to speak business. So when they talk to the CEO or to any other counterpart, they really had to learn to take a look at the rest of the business and ensure that they are fully aligned, right? So that's where some call it magic, some call it simply just being up for the game, as we talked about sports, right? So for me, that's really upping my game to a level as a supply chain expert, where I can really talk about the issues and all of those things that I need to address with the others. And it goes back to, the mindset and the rest equally, but also to have that skill that I'm able to convey the story sharp, short, nothing more really, and the rest of the board or the C-level team will understand where we are, right? So if I take a look at again, as you said, Adam, that a supply chain leader has the best view in the house of everything. Let's put it this way, just like the bus driver out of the front seat, right? So we have ideally the best seat in the house, right? To be informed of everything that goes about in the business. So why not use that, utilize that, and build up not just the business language knowledge, but also that, going back again to this neuroscience level of discussion, but have that skill as a supply chain leader to be able to connect all the dots across the business. and make decisions based on that, right? So that is one of those things where, but I talk about supply chain leadership, that is one of the critical elements that I'm looking for in the leader. So having that that acumen, that they are able to really look at everything from A to Z, from top to bottom, you name it. It doesn't matter where they are. If you drop them like a parachuter in one part of the business, they are able to connect the dots back to headquarters or down to the next level of suppliers or up to any of the customers, right? Depending on the problem. So that requires special skills, and that's what I'm looking for when I discuss with these things with the leadership. But of course, the other element, as we said, to be able to talk the business language that was not there for a long time. So
well, I think you really hit on some good points here, though. And Brian, you have been a professor or a teacher with some young folks at universities. You have kids yourself who are kind of coming up, and I'm wondering, and I want to get into some of the audience questions here, and I think it really relates to this theme of neuroscience, psychology, kind of integration of supply chain into other business units. And one of the audience members was wondering, when it comes to the supply chain, how should we be thinking about the way they work with, say, marketing or customer service? Are supply chains having to go deeper than they ever had before? And is maybe this a way where we can attract some future talent, where we start teaching them that supply chain isn't just moving goods, it's actually collaboratively working with the cool kids over in marketing and customer service on creating maybe a campaign together where we can really make some revenue and help the business? So is that a way for us to, attract future talent?
I think that's the way to do it. And I'm remembering my very first day in class at the School of Engineering at NYU. It's the one semester I taught. I just started teaching. The pandemic started. My first time teaching a college course. My first time teaching the material, operations and supply chain management. But I had one advantage. The program director had warned me. He said, "Brian, I think you'll do well with the kids, but I have to warn you, for many of them, this is just a requirement. They're just taking this as a requirement. It's not an elective. So you might encounter some apathy." And so the psychological trick I decided to play was on the first day, I was going to make them realize that all of them should be thinking about supply chains. And so, we talked about a bunch of things on the first day, but one of the things we talked about, I said, I know a lot of you are excited to go into marketing, or you're excited to go into finance, you want to go into banking, et cetera, et cetera. Here's the thing. Operations and supply chains is how the companies that sell things, that's how they make those things. Guess what? If those things are not made, there's nothing for marketing to do. You don't need marketing. You don't need sales. Unless the thing is made, however it gets made, there's no need for sales. Guess what? Unless the thing is made, there's no accounts receivable. There's no accounts payable. We don't need banking. You don't need to go get a loan to do anything. And so operations and supply chain, even though it's called back office and you guys don't think it's sexy, guess what? In any company, take away operations and supply chain and there's no company. And I think that got their attention. I think that made them sit.
Oh, there's a company, just not one making any money.
No, I'm gonna steal that. I'm stealing that example. I love that.
And I was like, this is why. I was like, look around you. There is nothing around you that exists without a supply chain.
That's right.
And so if this leaves you thinking that supply chains are a waste of time, I really don't.
Does the body need blood? Does the body need oxygen? Absolutely, it does. That's right. And so if you're here to have a body that can actually operate, you should probably work in supply chain.
You should probably work in.
But that brings us to a job that's never boring, right, Justin? I mean, when we're talking about transformation, and Sophia's done a really good job of laying out, it does take a mindset of transformation to get past resiliency and reinvent and rethink supply chains. But when we're talking, about transformation, how the heck is a supply chain manager also supposed to transform while dealing with disruption? It sounds like it'd be pretty easy to put that to-do item, keep scheduling it for in the future, because I just don't have time right now. Things are just too complex. How does a company deal with both at the same time, Justin?
I think that you have to, and this is one thing that I've discussed often, is you have to have that agile mindset. You know, you have to have that agile mindset whenever we're talking about supply chain management, because there's never a dull moment. You have no choice but to have an agile mindset, right? There's a lot of uncertainty that comes with a role within this discipline. Now when we talk about transformations, I always tell people that, you know, you have to perform your digital transformation maturity, you know. And, you know, because I implemented ERP applications for a number of years, right? So I'm not going to go from Excel spreadsheets to implementing SAP S/4HANA. Now am I? No, I'm not, right? And it's the same thing where, you know, we're talking about these digital transformations, we're talking about these emerging technologies. You're not going to go from Excel spreadsheets to using AI. You're not going to do it. You know, you're going to go from business process automation to robotic process automation. Then you might go to machine learning. Then you might go to AI, right? It's going to be a progression. So that's just one example. There's going to be a progression in all of these transformations, regardless of what that transformation is going to be. So if you're implementing any kind of change, that change has to start within your four walls. Right? You have to get buy-in from leadership, and then that leadership has to pretty much tell them what's in it for the employees. Once you get buy-in there, then you go outside of your business partners, like I said, where now you have demonstrated proof to say, I think in order for us to win-win, I think that we should implement lean processes, for example. That's just one example. I say that because we've done this in our organization. Now your suppliers are like, oh, man, that's amazing. How'd you do that? Now they do it. Now they talk to their suppliers, their manufacturers. Now they're talking to their customers about it. And at the end of the day, we're all in this together. We are all striving. Yes, we may be competing, but we're all in this for this goal of supply chain sustainability. At least I am. Okay, I'm speaking for myself. Okay, I'll say it. But we should all be in this together, you know, to have a more sustainable world. Because like what Brian said, if we keep operating business as usual, there's not going to be a world for us to make money. And now is it?
That's right.
Right.
Or stuff to enjoy.
Right.
At all. Right. Well, you know, Sophia, you know, I wonder, it's really easy out there to get into a zero-sum mentality, right? To Justin's point, but if we continue to butt up against each other and we're not working collaboratively, it's going to be really tough for us to overcome these challenges. And sometimes that might mean, in today's world, in order to keep the supply chain moving, that maybe we use suppliers or vendors that maybe wouldn't have used before. So in that consulting role, you probably do a lot of this pushing out the supply chain person out of their comfort zone. Right. And it's really easy to go ahead and say, I love these preferred vendors because they're always great. But let's say you need to onboard another vendor just to get the raw materials because you have a deadline to produce to your customer. How do you go about, you know, rethinking your vendor network, creating more diversity? We have this really big movement, especially in the US, called reshoring, right? We had this movement in the 80s where, you know, a lot of the factories went over to cheaper labor. And after that, it became more about diversifying your labor pool. And as the labor pool got of a higher quality and things became equal in costs, it was a really great global strategy to go ahead and get your products globally. But we have to get better at kind of rethinking the way we do our vendor and supplier networks. How do you have those discussions with people, especially transformation, when they can't find raw materials? Isn't it time to maybe even go to tier 1 or tier 2 suppliers that may go in direct conflict with how you've done business before? And how do you navigate people through that conversation?
Yeah, well, for me, that's, well, this is one of those areas where I'm in conflict with myself, and not because I haven't done the right thing, but I've been waiting for this kind of golden opportunity for over 15 years as a professional, because I've been preaching, maybe not the right word, but I've been talking about, proper supplier and partner. I would call them partner collaboration. So not even using, words like supplier or vendor, but I said to everyone that I've worked with, and I still do the same with leaders, saying, look, that person and that company is actually your partner. And then what you need to look out for and how you need to go about managing those relationships is really, like, I'm not joking, like a marriage. You need to respect each other. You need to give each other a mutual benefit for that collaboration. And if it's not in place, it will fall apart no matter what you do, right? So yes, if someone, for instance, treated a vendor previously in not the right way, then it will be a tough and long discussion to get them on board, to get them to warm up to that potential relationship again. Let's put it this way. And it can happen. It might not happen. It's all about, again, that psychological angle. If you break a plate, you can glue them together, the pieces, but they might not function the same way when they were not broken. So that needs to come back to, also a diversified, as you mentioned, that I'm a diversified thinking about what I really need, right? So as a business, do I need 3 or 4 partners to be able to run a supply chain that's resilient enough? And how do I manage that portfolio of relationships where everybody has benefit in that relationship? So I can choose to be very egoistic as a leader and say, yeah, I'm using the cheapest partner, so to say, at this moment in time, and the rest will never benefit or will not benefit over a longer period of time. But what I'm losing sight of is that if I'm exploiting that single vendor that was the cheapest at that point in time, then nobody will benefit in the end, because the others will either potentially go out of business by not getting, enough deals with either myself if I'm too big, or with others potentially, or simply they cannot provide that price for me later if I need to use them at any point in time, if I have a problem with that single source that I was using, right? So not even dual sourcing, but multiple sourcing, and having those beneficial partnership ecosystems, as we say it right now, within the sustainability discussions. It's vital, and it should have been vital also in the last 15, 20 years. We just didn't really think that way from a lot of angles, unfortunately. And that's why I said I have always been, having conflicting emotions about this topic, because I could never understand as a professional how come that this could not make sense for a long time for a lot of people, right? And by now I'm really lucky, and I'm happy. Let's put it this way. And now I arrived to a professional level and the era in my life where I can say I'm really happy to see that people started thinking the way I thought already 15 years ago, and we started really discussing that value of partnerships and how to manage that value of partnerships. It's super critical, and people started really understanding what are those beneficial points. What are those points where they create much more value than they ever thought before. So without going into much more detail, now they realize, some of the stuff that they thought of as waste before during their processes, even if they try to minimize it, right, due to efficiency, now they can sell it to someone else, right? And that other company can use it, and that's a revenue stream. Before that, it was a cost item on the P&L. So it's, again, a different way of thinking about these things. And that's where, these partnerships can deliver much more value and can take us closer to sustainable and resilient setups that we can really operate in a profitable way. It will not give us, endless growth. It will not, but it will be long-term sustainable and long-term profitable.
Well, an ecosystem for continual improvement you know. And in order to actually pull that off, to take what I would say the buzzword bingo, this is not a buzzword. This is just the truth. I would say that the word to describe the supply chain right now is opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity right now. And often in life, in our own personal lives, we may overcome a massive disruption, but it definitely allowed us to get to the next, level personally. And so we can't look at disruption to the supply chain as something to break us down and cause us to not be able to deliver, but as this opportunity to really step back and rethink. And as Justin said, get back to the fundamentals. As Brian said, make sure that everybody is on the same page, that they feel that there's value in supply chain. As Sophia said, as a way to change your mindset and really work together to say what's possible and that we're in it together. That no longer are we living in a world that can continue to do this. Technology, for good or bad, and I think ultimately good, has brought us all together. I'm in Texas, Brian's in New York, Justin, I'm not sure where you are. Sophia, you're in Switzerland. Where are you at, Justin?
Maryland.
Maryland, right? And we're talking to folks here who are from Pakistan, from the Netherlands, and worldwide, all through this amazing video technology. And to Brian's key core message that he's out there championing every day, the world is truly now a supply chain because we've been able to bring us together. Through that connectivity and through that ecosystem, we have a great opportunity to chat, to overcome big challenges in the world. And it is up to us to make it happen. So let's rethink it. Let's build in resiliency. Let's work together and collaborate. And let's all do what we really want to do. Make the world a bit better to enjoy so we can hang out with our friends and our family. So we enjoy the work we're doing. We love who we work with, and we're doing big things. So for my esteemed guests here and panelists today, I can't thank you enough for your insights and your wisdom.
Thank you.
For our audience, thank you for tuning in, and I hope you got some value out of these great brains. Before we leave, make sure you get their names, reach out to them on LinkedIn or check them out on Twitter. We'll go ahead and get that stuff to C-Node so they can publish on the page, because I know this group would be up for talking to anybody about anything really, and we'll probably make some sort of metaphor or analogy to the supply chain. So thank you once again to Sophia, to Brian, to Justin for joining us today. My name's Adam. We really appreciate your attendance here today. And thanks so much. I hope everybody has a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you all personally for an amazing